Welcome to day 19 of our daily Bible reading program. As I've said before, I'm not going to be talking about everything. This is not a comprehensive commentary. I'm just going to be lifting up the things that caught my attention as I was reading through today. Our readings today are Genesis chapters 47, 48, Psalm 10, and Luke 19. In the Genesis section, we have Joseph and his family settling in Egypt, but Psalm 10 caught my attention a little bit more today. We read that the wicked snub God. And this psalm is really a call to God for action, to protect the weak, to bring justice, to punish the wicked. I think there's a lot of us who still wish that we could see a little bit more of that happening in our world today. The psalm points out that God's grace and order wins in the end, and godlessness loses. And there's a hope in God and a hope in God's action. The question that I have as I was reading this today is, does God choose to act through us? Do we have a part in God's creation to make God's justice and mercy and action happen? Does God's creation include us as far as agents who can take action? Which then raises the question, if we want a different world, do we need to do something about it? I think sometimes we really focus on asking God to do something to fix the world, but it really seems that both through the Old Testament, but also through Jesus, that God has a purpose for us, and that God gave us the ability to create and to make decisions and to take action as a way of working with God. The covenant that God set up with Abraham, if you think of that as a treaty or a partnership, then both sides bring something to the agreement and both sides do something. And so sometimes I wonder if we are too quick to turn and expect God to take care of everything instead of looking at what are the resources that God has given me, what is the inspiration God has given me, and how can I take action to make God's kingdom grow on earth right now. Turning to Luke 19, we've got the Zaccaheus story. And some of us learned a goofy song about Zaccaheus when we were in Sunday school, but he was a tax collector. So he was a Jewish person working for the Roman Empire, collecting taxes. And the way this worked is that the tax collectors were told how much they had to collect. But if they collected more and pocketed the difference, Rome could care less. So tax collectors were really not appreciated by their neighbors. And a lot of tax collectors were very corrupt and had become very rich themselves. And Zacchaeus is one of them. But Zacchaeus is also really short. He's heard about Jesus and he would really like to see Jesus. Now he's living in Jericho. This is the first city that was conquered by the Israelites when they returned from Egypt and their time in the wilderness. This is the first city that they encountered in the Promised Land. So it's just kind of interesting that Zacchaeus is in this particular town. It kind of reminds us of where the Israelites have been in the past. Now, one of the things that occurred to me is there's an emphasis on Zacchaeus being short. He climbs a tree in order to see above everyone. There's clearly a prejudice against short people back then. And to be honest, we still live with a prejudice that diminishes, pun intended, the people who are shorter in our world today. And I think that's something for us to think about. What are the things that we use to separate ourselves and divide ourselves? And height is definitely one of those things. So Zacchaeus was corrupt, but Jesus makes it clear that he comes for anyone who is lost and lonely. And Zacchaeus has been marginalized by his community through his own decisions and his actions, to be sure. But Zacchaeus was found by Jesus. Jesus welcomed Zacchaeus, ate with Zacchaeus, changed Zacchaeus' heart. And Zacchaeus then decides to return his ill-gotten gains to his neighbors and to live in a new way. Now, it doesn't say he stops being a tax collector. It could be that he's still a tax collector. He's just an honest and ethical tax collector. In our world today, who do we think are hopelessly lost? Zacchaeus, as a tax collector, would have been seen as one of the hopelessly lost for the people of Jesus' times. Question is, are we willing to see the people that we think are hopelessly lost? Moving on to verse 26, Jesus challenges us to risk more of our life, and we might end up getting more than we ever dreamed of. And I think this is another challenging thing. Just like in the psalm, Is there a role that we have to play in building God's kingdom today? Are we willing to risk what God has given us? I don't know if it's really the point of it is to necessarily end up with more than what we started out with, but are we willing to stretch out and do more than we think is possible? Are we willing to increase God's investment in us? Is risk perhaps another way of saying, are we willing to reach out to the lost and lonely, regardless of what it may cost us? There's a funny little bit here towards the end about shouting praise, and that if the people don't praise God, the stones will praise God. When was the last time we raised a ruckus in God's glory? I know in one town 150 years ago, the Methodists were in trouble with their neighbors because they worshiped so loudly on Sunday mornings that the neighbors complained. And, when was the last time we raised the roof because our praise and our worship was so loud and raucous? Jesus was focused throughout this on teaching more people, connecting with more people, especially people who are lost and lonely. And I think this is a real question for us today. Are we connecting with people through teaching? Are we sharing our faith? Are we helping people learn more about God so that they can be more connected to God? And I think there's some real relationships that can be built through here. And I think that's one of the challenges we have today. Hope you have a super day. We'll see you next time.